just because you get knocked down doesn't mean you have to stay down or you have to stay in that place of, oh, this knocked me down, so this is
Yeah,
now where I belong.
right.
It things can happen that aren't your fault, but it is your responsibility of, of how you're going to deal with that, how you're going to choose to live with that in your life. Are you going to hold on to that victim mentality,
Hmm.
or are you going to say, no, 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 this happened to me, but that doesn't define me?
Yes. I'm Joey Youngjan Liu, educator, researcher, storyteller, and coach. And this is Everyone Needs a Story for the Campfire. This podcast brings you impactful stories each week, drawn from my guests' lived experiences. You will gain inspiration, insight, new perspectives, and hopefully a sense of familiarity and belonging as we explore the themes that make us all at once uniquely individual, yet collectively human. This week, I sit down with best-selling author, business owner, educator, and leadership coach, AliceAnne Loftus. AliceAnne generously shares her story of resilience, teaching us a powerful lesson on taking responsibility for one's own life through the good and the bad. In her second story, AliceAnne shifts her exploration to love, particularly how understanding love languages empowers how we give and receive love to those we are in relationship with. Hi, AliceAnne. Welcome to the show. Everyone needs a story for the campfire. It's so amazing to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, me too. I've been really looking forward to it. And for the audience, I just want to share a little bit of my background and my connection to AliceAnne. You are my husband Michael's first cousin, right? Part of the big, beautiful Bondoc family on my husband's Filipino side. So you and Michael are both half Filipino, right? And related through your moms. Your moms are sisters. And there's how many of you cousins in your family? Like 50
Oh my
first
gosh,
cousins?
I don't even know. Um, yeah, I don't even know. I think there's 13 of my
Siblings.
mom's siblings, right?
Yes.
And I don't even know. But I do have some great stories for Michael if you ever want to
Yes.
chat about that.
Yes, we'll have to hear baby Michael stories, young Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yes. So out of these, I want to say we counted with your apu, who's your grandma, right? On your mom's side. I think it's something like 50, but I could be off. But I've met many of the cousins. I just happened, even though we've both been in the US, we were on like opposite coasts. So I haven't met you in person yet. But I feel like I know you so well because my sweet husband bought me as a gift your book, Take the Lead, this year when I
Oh,
embarked on my coaching journey. He said, my cousin AliceAnne, and he looks up to you so much because you're one of the older cousins, right? You're like a big sister cousin, right? And he said, she's a coach and she's a business leader. She's an educator too. You guys have so much in common. He bought me this book. And it's amazing what sharing your story really does to form connections. I will say that my impression of you, having not met you, when I just kind of heard of you in the family, I'm just like, you have this really polished Facebook page and you grew up in the Midwest and the East Coast. And I'm just like, I was this little girl in Southern California. I'm like, what do we have in common? Um, and then I read your book, and from like the first page, I was just like, see, this is why we need to wait to listen to people's stories, because page after
hmm.
page, I mean, granted, we have very different lives in many regards, but I just found so many connection points that really made me feel a sense of belonging and appreciation. Both of us are Hapa women, right? Half Asian,
Hmm.
half
Yeah.
Caucasian women who were born in Asia and then taken from our families and our familiar, comfort zones, our big, big Asian families, and then came to the US and navigated these spaces as outsiders, but also as outsiders with this, this look that, or this, people couldn't really put us in a box, right? And we
Yeah.
often are
Yeah.
navigating like, what does that mean? What box do I fit in or don't fit in? And how do I find my own identity and path? So I just have to say that through reading your book, even though I haven't met you face to face, connecting with you through a screen, with you on your page has just brought me so much joy, so much comfort, and sense of belonging. So I'm just so lucky to have you in my life, and I can't
Oh,
wait to meet you for real in person.
that is, I'm like blushing because you're just so gracious and, yeah, we have to connect, and our stories do link us together. There's always similarities woven in through that. And my
Yeah.
mother always said, she's like, you got to meet Joey. Like, you guys are just going to hit it off so much. So, yeah.
Yeah, your mom and I like have the best time. She's a hoot. She's the life of the party, and yeah, I've gotten to hang out with her a few times and take a few trips with teaching, and I love it. She is so much
Yeah.
fun. Okay, well, I'm so grateful for you coming. I introduced you at the beginning of the show. You've done so many amazing things in life, and I'm just so excited for my audience to hear from you firsthand, just a couple of your stories that you've prepared so lovingly for our space here today at the campfire. And the first story that you've told me you're going to share does connect to Charlotte's story in our last episode, where she talked about moving through grief of losing her grandfather and losing really pieces of her identity, navigating coming to this country as well and losing parts of herself. But the theme didn't stay on grief. It moved towards resilience. And how do we move
Mhm.
through that towards love, hope, peace, joy? And you've shared with me that you have a story that actually takes on a similar arc, where you find responsibility to create your own happiness after challenging times, right?
Yes, absolutely. So, to speak on resilience, it's not whether or not you're going to face something in your life that you have to bounce back from.
Yeah.
It's not if you're going to do that. It's when you do, right?
Mm,
And we can either live at the effect of our life or at the cause of our life. And meaning things happen that are out of our control. It's not our fault that that happened, but that doesn't mean it dictates the narrative moving forward. Like, just because you get knocked down doesn't mean you have to stay down, or you have to stay in that place of, oh, this knocked me down, so this is
yeah.
now where I belong.
Right.
It Things can happen that aren't your fault, but it is your responsibility of, of how you're going to deal with that, how you're going to choose to live with that in your life. Are you going to hold on to that victim mentality,
Hmm.
or are you going to say, no, 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 this happened to me, but that doesn't define me?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I think about a specific story to share, it's more about a season of life that
Mm,
I was in. You know, yes, if you read my book, you see that there was a lot of stuff that happened in my life at a very
yeah.
young age
Yeah.
that wasn't my fault.
Right.
It wasn't my fault. I was a child. I relied on others, and
Yeah.
bad things happened, unfortunately.
Right.
So I fell into patterns and behaviors of this victim mentality that every time something bad would happen as I was building my business, I would say, oh, of course that happens, and I have every right to have this hot temper and be
Mm,
explosive and, come back at it with this like power punch. Because that's how I learned to deal with my challenges in life. I
right.
was taught very early in life that in order to protect myself, in order to get what I needed, not wanted, needed, safety, love, you know, um, I had to fight. I had
Yeah.
to fight for that. And, I do have a history of abuse, sexual trauma. And so those were the tools that I had in my toolbox. Was it didn't matter the trigger. I was going to fight back with a sledgehammer. And I found that what that was doing in my life as a new mom, as a business owner, just a young adult navigating through the world in this victim mentality, is that I was always waiting for that other shoe to drop, for someone to disappoint me, for something bad to happen in my business. And I actually like self prophesized that. you know,
Yeah.
just a few years into business, I started really struggling in my company. I was having a hard time staying in the black. I had all of these behaviors that were blocking me from really being the cause of my own success.
Mm. Wow.
And I think we fall into that. We don't want to take responsibility for that because when bad things happen, we want to say, oh, it's not my fault. It's not
Yeah.
my fault. When we start to take responsibility of our happiness and our success, that means we also have to take responsibility when things don't work out moving forward. And
Yes.
that is so hard. It's
Right.
so hard. So, I had a series of things going on. I almost lost my business. I was looking at divorce. Um,
Wow.
I was not showing up as a mother, the mother I wanted to be, the business
Mm,
owner I wanted to be, the friend I wanted to be. I
mm,
was truly like not just not thriving, I was not surviving in life.
mm,
And I had to step back and really look at it and say, okay, a lot of things in my life that happened were not my fault. They were not my fault. But at what point, AliceAnne, are you going to take responsibility for your happiness moving forward?
wow.
I had to really have that hard conversation with myself and say, yeah, stuff happens, but
Mm,
that doesn't mean that has to be your story moving forward.
right.
You have the power to, well, number one, you're only in control of your attitude and your effort.
Mhm.
So if you think that you can control your life, where the role that you're in as a business owner or as a parent, you have small kids, you can't
Yeah.
control anything. You can't control anything. So if you can just relinquish that power and just say, I am only in control of my attitude towards this and the effort I put forward. And I'm responsible for my own happiness. So once I was able to accept that and kind of call myself out for my own nonsense for repeating patterns that no longer served me, I was able to just adopt this learner's mindset
Mhm.
of really looking at things and saying, okay, I might not be winning right now, but what am I learning and how can I apply that to better myself?
Right.
And yeah, that was a huge shift in my business. I went back to school, got certified as a leadership coach, and I did not get certified as a leadership coach because I wanted to coach. I got certified as a leadership coach because I wanted to learn about leadership.
Wow.
Yeah, specifically self-leadership. I wanted to
Wow.
how to lead myself towards my own success and happiness.
Yeah.
And I tell you, even if I never coached a single individual, going through that program changed my life.
Mm.
It changed my life because I was able to look at myself and gain my power back that I was responsible for myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
And remember when I said when you're responsible for your success, you're also responsible for your failings and how that felt burdensome? Going through that program, yes, all that's still true, but I felt empowered.
Wow.
Just shifting the mindset of rather than being a judger of my
Mhm.
life, but a
Mhm.
learner of my life
Mm.
and saying,
Mm.
every experience we've gone through has taught us something.
Yes.
Yeah, it's taught us something. And
Yes.
I can look back at those things that were not my fault, and I can still have grace, um, appreciation, forgiveness,
Mhm.
and say, those things, yeah, they happened and they made me who I am, but they don't define me. They
Mhm.
give me the tools and the strength to be the version I want to be.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, completely changed my life. And I found that doing that work and taking ownership of what I was responsible for, like really being responsible for it, I was able to turn my business around. My husband and I became closer than probably we were when we even first came together. Like it just
Mhm.
totally rekindled our love because I
Mm.
loved myself. I wasn't in this
Yes.
like place of like, oh, when is this guy going to hurt me? Because I know he's going to hurt me, right? That's
Mm.
what you tell yourself when you're a victim. Like,
Mm.
I'm not really lovable. I'm not really so let
Wow.
me just like protect myself here.
Yeah.
No, I was able to take those walls down and be open to receive love.
Mm.
Um, and every aspect of my life began to thrive because I felt empowered. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, AliceAnne, for that story. As I'm sitting here listening, it's like ping, 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 ping. Like
Yeah.
every part of your story is connecting with my experience. It's crazy. I'm just sitting
Hmm.
here like, oh my gosh, me too, me too, me too.
Yeah. Hmm.
I first of all, I want to say thank you for stepping into your truth. And for naming some of the things that you've been through. And you didn't have to go into detail, but just the fact that I know that we share this common thread in our life of being victims to really bad things that happen to you that you didn't ask for. You know, I'm also a survivor of sexual assault and abuse. And while it's not something I go into detail and relive, it's a thread that I carry with me very much as you described it so clearly, how it shows up in that victim mentality, right? If we
Hmm.
let it, which
Yeah.
actually we all start there, I think, because,
Of course.
until we go through
Of
this healing
course.
process that you like outlined and described here, like we can't blame ourselves for being in that victim mentality when we're just in that state of survival, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just really appreciate you sharing how you transformed and really traveled through that storyline. But I want
Mhm.
to follow a little bit or dig a little deeper into one point where you said you realized that if you were to, how did you say it? If we're going to take responsibility for our successes, we also have to take responsibility for our failures, right? And you
Mhm.
said that
Mhm.
you had a desire to make a shift and then it brought you into the leadership coaching program.
Mhm.
Was there a moment that catalyzed that like aha for you, that realizing that I have to actually do something to change this pattern or I'm going to be a victim to the victim mentality for the rest of my life?
Yeah. I don't know if there was a shift. I couldn't tell you an exact moment,
Okay.
but I went through a lot of therapy.
Mm,
And so talking about that victim mentality, it is true. I was a victim um in my young life. And just
mhm.
like you were a victim, anyone that experiences any kind of trauma, yes, there is a phase where you are a victim of
Mhm.
that. And like I said, I went through a lot of therapy of that. And it got to a point where I was so tired of talking about what happened.
Yes.
I was so tired. I
Yes.
think everyone needs a therapist at some point in their life. And so
Yes.
there's by no means am I saying therapy doesn't work. But I got to a point where I was like, I'm so tired of talking about it. It doesn't matter what happened to me
Yeah.
because it happened. It's over. That that girl, why is she reliving that? And
Mhm.
why is she showing up in today's life
Mhm.
where she's not in harm's way, she's not being
Mhm.
threatened, her safety is, you know,
Mhm.
it's not um, at jeopardy. Why am I still showing up as
Mhm.
that young girl?
Mhm.
And I said, I want to look for something that's going to support me in changing that narrative.
Yes.
And when I started researching how to do that, coaching came up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's amazing. And I love
Yeah.
that you share your reason why you got into coaching because
Hmm.
that's so refreshing. Um, I think coaching has now really become kind of a crowded space and people are seeing a lot of business opportunities, which is great. Like,
Yeah, it's a
you know,
billion
it's
dollar industry. Yeah.
it's awesome that people can create the life that they want through helping others. It's beautiful. But I
Hmm.
love,
Hmm.
love, love your authenticity in tying the origin story, right, of you deep diving into this education and this learning, you call yourself a learner multiple times through your story, was
Hmm.
I need to gain the tools. I need to self-discover first, right? If
Hmm.
I get
Yes.
nothing out of this but to learn how to be my own leader, right? Was what you said.
Yeah.
It's all
Hmm.
worth it. And I think that's such a crucial step that I hope nobody misses, right? We become
Yeah.
of most service to others when we've healed, when we've learned ourselves, right? And
Hmm.
when we've integrated those tools to really live the life and be the person that is the healthiest and happiest and fullest version of ourselves possible, to then go and show up for others, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I didn't even know I wanted to be a coach.
Hmm.
I just wanted to go through the program and learn the skills of how to shift my mindset.
Yeah,
Like I said,
absolutely.
it changed my life, and I'm so grateful for the program that I went through and the people that I met. And I saw an immediate impact in how I was showing up for myself.
Yeah, I can really relate. And I wanted to make one more point too here. I totally relate that even for me, I'm making this transition in my life at this particular moment. This podcast kind of
Hmm.
documents this transition for me. I've been an educator similar to you since I was very young. I think we both started at 22 in our education careers.
Hmm.
Well, for me, even a little earlier. And I think you too. You said,
Me too.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I think I was like 18, 19. So,
Right.
mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Society gives credentials to different levels of that, but we know we've been teaching people
Mhm.
for most of
Mhm.
our life. But this transition into coaching for me, there was a lot of internal shifts that had to be made for me too. And I really appreciate you putting words to that. I specifically hired a coach and a spiritual teacher because I recognized that one thing that was holding me back into taking a step into being a coach and taking on more of a leadership position outside of the classroom, which can start to feel like a very safe space that we've created for ourselves
Yeah.
and our students.
Mhm.
But to take that bigger step into vulnerability and leadership, I knew actually I needed to tackle this victim theme that was still
Yeah.
showing up for
Mhm.
me, and to do that
Mhm.
by honoring what I've been through but not letting it define me. So it feels so serendipitous sitting across the screen from you here today, knowing that we grew up
Mhm.
totally separate lives without ever
Yeah.
intersecting, but that there's so many parallels. And I mindful of my audience, I also want to share that, we're all on different parts of our journey and different phases of our journey. So I just want to speak to anyone listening who might be at a different point of their journey right now, that if you are earlier on in your journey, don't feel any sense of shame for being where you're at,
Yeah.
right? Like, I had to go through over a decade of therapy. Actually, I always say that one of the things I'm most grateful for being a victim of crime was having access to like top tier therapy free of charge,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
EMDR therapy and all of that saved my life,
Yeah.
but also gave me the tools and frameworks to look into healing that I could then share with others, right?
Mhm.
But similar to you, I got to a point where I didn't want to tell my story anymore. And much of my narrative coaching is honoring each of those phases. Sometimes you're in that phase right at the beginning where all you have to do is get that story out, whether that's
Yeah.
on paper to
Mhm.
yourself or your own first audience, or with a therapist or in trusted spaces, support groups, right? And then I've coached many people into taking that story and turning it into an art form once you're at a further stage of your healing that you can feel empowered to share. But I had a distinct moment in my life where I retired that story. I got to a point where like
Mhm.
I'm done now. I've healed from it. I've made it beautiful. I've shared it with impact. And now I will never tell that story again in that way, because I just simply don't
Mhm.
need to relive those moments anymore. But I want to just, before we transition to the next story, just give space for all of our listeners that might be at each of those different points in their journey,
Yeah.
and just make that clear that you don't have to be all the way over here, right? And we're not even at the end. We're continuing in our
Oh gosh,
learning and
I'm healing every
healing.
day.
Yeah.
I'm healing every
Yeah.
day.
Yes.
And I think, just to touch on that, there's no timeline
Yeah.
for the healing process of that. Like I said, I'm 20 years into this, and it still creeps up. It still does. You're
Absolutely.
still going to have moments that trigger you, and you're like, ah, now, and you slip into your default coping mechanisms or trauma responses. And I just want to share to anyone that might relate to that, or regardless of what the trauma is, if you feel like you're in that victim place, I think you'll know when you're ready to shift, when you recognize that the like I said, the coping mechanisms or the way that you are responding to things no longer serves you.
Serve you. Yes.
Yeah. You
Yes.
know, when you start to see you're using your behaviors, you're making excuses for them, and you know that that's not who you want to be or how you want to show up, that's when you can that might be an indicator of a
Mm,
switch or a transition happening. But there's no timeline for that, and there's absolutely no shame. It's just how it happened with me. And when I said, I'm ready to make that, and I'm ready to take
mm.
responsibility for my happiness, not responsibility for the trauma, but responsibility for my future happiness, that's when the shift happens.
AliceAnne, that is such an amazing and tangible benchmark.
Mhm.
I think that's really helpful. I mean, you saying that it's helpful for me, and I'm sure it'll be helpful for so many people. You're an amazing coach. Thank you for sharing
Oh,
that insight.
thank you.
Are you ready to shift a little bit into your second
Sure.
story? I'll
Mhm.
introduce it for our audience a little bit, and I loved when um, suggested to me that these were the stories that were coming up for you in your heart that you wanted to share on this podcast, because you're one of my few guests who suggested that you wanted to share a story about love. And I think that's just such a testimony to who you are and where you are in your life. And so I think this is going to be a treat for my audience to be able to hear your story about love, and different forms of love, particularly the idea of love languages, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So I am not an expert in love languages. So my story is really more about recognizing bids for love,
Mm,
and when you are not feeling love, that I invite you to maybe scratch the surface a little bit and get to know the people in your life and what their love languages may or may not be, because that will deepen the connection, give you a better understanding of those around you, and make it easier to access that love. Coming from a place of trauma and abuse, not to harp on that theme, but when you have something like that happen young in your life, love can be a really confusing thing.
right.
It's so confusing, um, because affection might not feel safe. It might not feel true. You can't always believe what people say to you. There's and and not just physical abuse, emotional abuse,
Yeah.
or um, you know, it's it can really kind of gaslight you into
Mm,
to not understanding or believing that you are not lovable.
yeah. Right.
And that showed up a lot for me in my life. And it wasn't until I became a mother myself and I took ownership that I didn't want to pass on narratives to my children, that
Mm,
I never wanted my children to believe that they were unlovable or um, hard to love. That was
mm.
something I heard a lot when I was young, that I was hard to love.
Oh,
And it it's, I didn't want to pass that on.
right.
And and even in my marriage, my husband and I, we have 21 years age difference between us. I
Wow.
don't know if you knew that. Yeah,
I
so
read in your book 20, but it's 21.
it's 21.
Wow.
21.
Okay.
I say he's 20 years my senior. But
Hmm.
he and I we're from different worlds. It's I do not recommend marrying someone much older than you if you are not willing to do the work to really kind of understand that gap. But
Yeah.
he shows his love differently, and many times throughout our marriage I would say, I don't feel loved. I don't I don't feel like I'm getting what I need from you.
Mm,
And and he would be so confused, because and he'd say, "But I love you like more than anything on this earth." And so how can someone love you and you not feel loved?
Right. Right.
Right? And it's like speaking two different languages. If
Mm.
someone's speaking to you in, Tagalog and you only speak French, you're going to say, we're not talking to each other.
Yeah.
So no matter how much that person is talking, if they're not speaking your language and you're not willing to learn the language, and both ways, both sides, you have to learn on both sides. You're always going to have that disconnect.
Yeah.
And, you're going to miss those bids for connection. You're going to miss those displays of love and affection. And so we had to do the work. We had to do the work. And so when we made that decision to not get divorced,
Mm.
which that's a whole other story there, because we almost got divorced.
Wow.
And, we were separated very briefly, and he called me in the middle of the night and he was like, I can't live without you. Like,
Mm.
how are we going to make this work? And, I even went as far as I was about to retain a divorce lawyer, and she looked at me and she's
Wow.
like, you don't want a divorce. You do not want a divorce. I wish I could remember her name, because I would love to send her a thank you card and just say, she was like, I see a lot of people that come to me and want a divorce, and they truly need a divorce. You do not
Mm.
need a divorce. She said, you need
Wow.
to learn how to communicate
Mm.
with each other and learn how he loves you, and he needs to learn how you need love and how you give love.
Wow.
And best advice ever. I mean, good on
Amazing.
her, right? Good on her. She could have just
Yeah.
easily taken my money, and so,
Yes.
um, but learning that. And so we did the work. We
Mhm.
did the work of expressing, hey, this is how I express love, or how I show love. Here's how I need to receive love, or what it feels like for me to receive
Mm.
love. And that was powerful for us. It
Wow.
was so
Yeah.
powerful. And having that honest communication, and not being angry with someone
Mm.
because their love language is different than yours.
Yeah.
Um, do you know the love languages off the top of your head?
Yeah, let's see. Acts of service, physical touch, gifts, words of affirmation, and quality time.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Um, and so, like, really having those discussions with people and saying, this is how I need it. This is how
Mhm.
I feel it. Yeah,
Mhm.
and being okay to that there's no one way that's better or worse than the other,
Yes.
that's just our language.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, but how that shifted with even my children
Mm.
is recognizing that how I give love, just because I birthed them and raised them,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that's how they receive it
Receive it.
or how they give
Mhm.
it. Mhm. And so doing the work as a parent to say, how does my child receive love? How do they show love? And I promise you, as you get into teens and young adults, you're going to be searching. You're looking for every little crumb you can of how much they love you, because they don't tell you as much as they did when they
Oh,
were little.
yeah.
But, recognizing that, and recognizing when the love that you think you're giving, when it might be smothering them or
Mm.
making them uncomfortable or
Mm.
pushing them away, or all of those things. Because as well intentioned as you might be, if you don't speak their love language, or if you're not recognizing their love language, you're totally missing the point of connecting
Absolutely.
with someone.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I do love language exercises with people I work with my friends, obviously with my children, continually with my husband. We talk about it a lot. It's important to me that the people around me feel loved, and
Yeah. Mm.
don't have to question um, how I feel about them, and I also think it's a respect.
Yeah.
It's like, I care enough about you that I
Yeah.
want you to receive love the way you best receive love.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so powerful. I'm so into the love languages too. And I think I went through a phase when we first discovered it in my friend circle and everyone was giving the quizzes and taking the quizzes, what's your love
Mhm,
language? And then I think it like, just sets sort of a precedence, a framework, right? That you can even go
mhm,
beyond those initial five that are presented. Is it Gottman that presented those five love languages? Or
mhm,
I'm making that up?
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and then you start discovering like these are, you get a little bit more specific with your love
Yeah,
languages,
you
and
get a
then
little deeper.
it's
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'll share with you even just today, my husband called me and I was like in the middle of something really took a lot of brain power. Like it was very detailed, so I couldn't get distracted. And I kind of bit his head off. I was like, I am
Yeah.
so like in the weeds
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Like, like I don't have time for this. I don't have time for you. No,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Gosh, it sounds like you're having a really rough day." And I said, "I am. I'm having a really rough day." And he's like, "Okay, I'll check in with you later." And then 30 minutes later, I get a little text, and he says, I was in paying my state filings, and I went ahead and reported yours too." My husband's love language is acts of
Of
service.
service. Mine too.
Anything he can do to
Yeah.
make my life easier,
Yeah.
he's gonna do it.
Yeah.
And and my whole body was just, like, filled with warmth that
Oh.
I just, like, ripped this guy a new
Mm.
one, and he's like, "My wife's having a hard time right now.
Mm.
What can I do to make her life easier?" Because I love her.
Mm.
And, when you can recognize people's love language, how they give and how they receive, um, I think that it opens up a whole new world of opportunities to feel that and to connect
Absolutely.
deeper
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're not just seeing them through your lens. Um, it's
Mm.
it's like you can see all the colors and
Mm.
all the feels with that.
Mm.
So,
It
mhm.
helps you be less black and white, right? Like less
Mhm.
extreme or fixed in your expectations around people because people aren't one thing, right? And so I
Yeah.
think a lot of our communication breakdowns or relationship breakdowns happen when we become too fixated on an expectation or too black and white in our thinking, like if this is how I communicate or this is how I show I care, that must be how I receive it too. Like that's what you need to do in order for me to understand it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that you shared this story with us, and little insights into how love language should play out in your actual relationships in your family, because it might be something that people have heard before. It might be something brand new. If this is brand new for you, like please look up love languages and do the quizzes. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. I don't
It's
know if
pretty
you have show
revolutionary.
notes, but maybe you could drop something in the show
Yeah, I'll
notes of where they
show.
can learn about it. Mhm.
Absolutely. I'll drop a link below, because yeah, for I think anyone that I know who's first discovered love language or their first time discovering this idea of love languages, it puts you in a chokehold for a minute because you really start to rethink like, oh my gosh,
You're like,
so many of the breakdowns I experienced is just because I didn't
mhm.
understand this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people's behaviors that might have driven you crazy before,
Yeah.
you're like, "Oh, they're expressing love to me.
Yeah.
How can you be
Yeah.
mad at somebody when they're expressing love to
Absolutely.
you?" So,
Yeah.
it just opens up a whole new world.
Absolutely.
It is like you speak multiple languages and you just
Yeah.
have access to so many more things. So,
I appreciate that you mentioned too that like, in one family or one household, everyone can have different love languages. But I'm also
yes.
kind of recalling now too, when you said that your husband's love language is acts of service, mine is totally as well. And I'm realizing that's also his mom's. And I've observed that, like, actually, I've seen that in your mom, and I've seen it in so many people
Mhm,
within your family, that acts of
mhm,
service is a love language. And I think it becomes helpful to then also study like the patterns that we've absorbed around us. Like, for
mhm.
example, one thing that used to
Absolutely.
drive me crazy in my Hakka family, we're really direct in our language. We say what
Mhm,
we mean what we say. There's little decorum around it. And that's gotten us in trouble, especially navigating, like American social settings and where you're supposed to be a little bit, more indirect and polite, or
mhm,
what they consider as polite is different from our cultural cultural background. But even within my relationships, and babe, we can totally edit this out if it doesn't feel good to you. But like even within my relationships with Michael and the family, like I've had to learn that like saying everything directly or saying like even words of affirmation don't mean so much to him. Like just words in general don't mean as much as action, right? Acts of
Yeah.
service. And so I had to learn that I might not get a verbal I'm sorry
Mhm.
for X, Y, and Z from him. But what sorry
Mhm.
looks like for him and others around him might be like, I feel bad, so I'm going to make you a meal, right? I'm going to leave
Yeah.
this meal that you didn't ask for on the table because, I
Mhm.
kind of feel bad about snapping at you or ignoring your bid for love. And it took me years to
Mhm.
understand that. And I'm still working on it. Like actually you sharing that story that you just shared about your husband,
Mhm.
filing your, what was it? Your business
Like
filings.
My Maryland, yeah, business
Yeah.
for our state, yeah.
You
But
know,
even like my love language is gift giving, and
mhm,
I would spoil my kids rotten. My daughter's love language is not gift giving. So
mhm.
I thought, gosh, I'm buying her all these things. I'm like anything she wants, I make sure she has it. I was totally the like overboard spoiling mom. And I'm like, why doesn't like what a brat. She doesn't appreciate any of this. And to her, that's she didn't feel love from those things.
Mm.
That is not love to her. Any sort of gift is not she does not receive that as love. It's
Yeah.
nice, she appreciates it, but that's not she's not gonna feel love from that.
Yeah.
And, that it totally shifted because when especially when she moved away from home and I would hear that she was sad
Mm.
and I would wanna send her, like, a care package, and then I'm like, "But wait a minute, that's not gonna she's not gonna feel love from that." She's gonna be like, "Oh, my mom sent me something." She'll probably look at it, put it aside, and so I had to really think about it. What what would she like?
Mm.
What would make her feel most loved, And I'm still learning that as she's
Mm.
growing into that adult, sometimes it changes
It
because
does
young
change.
adults are yeah, the young
Yeah.
adults are kind of they're figuring themselves out. So she might even not even know what her love language is
Yeah.
fully yet. And you have to do the work. There's not
Yes.
just a wide brush. I often think of
Right.
plants, which I do not have a green thumb at all. But if you treated your plants in your home the same way, like put all of them in full sun, watered them all the same, chances are you're not going to have all of them survive.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you've got to know what your plant needs.
Exactly. They all need different things, different conditions
They
to
all,
thrive.
mhm, mhm,
Yes.
yeah. So it's about having the respect and caring enough to
Yeah.
know. Mhm.
Yeah. I love that you said it's respect, because it's easier, I think, to box people into what we're familiar with, right? Um,
Mhm.
it takes time to learn to see things
Yeah.
differently. So you've used this phrase a couple times, putting in the work, and it does feel like putting in the work, especially at first. But then once you exercise those muscles of compassion and empathy and deep thinking and really actually curiosity, it comes down to like being curious enough
Yes.
to learn the people that we're doing life with and sharing space with. When we frame it with curiosity, it almost lets us get into a playful spirit about it. And we can lower our
Yes.
expectations on ourselves at the same time that we're lowering expectations on them. And it becomes this little shared experiment. We go back to our child scientist like selves, just discovering
Mhm.
each other, discovering ourselves. And you mentioned, like with your daughter, that as you grow, your love language changes. But I think we can also
Mhm.
give grace to ourselves as adults, no matter how old we are, that our love language could change too. And sometimes I found that it's circumstantial, right? So, for example, for
Yeah.
me, growing up, I was just like your daughter. I did not care about gifts. That did not express love to
Mhm.
me at all. And then now as an adult, I found that I appreciate it a lot more as a language of love because I recognize what goes behind it, right? When you gift a gift,
Yes.
you are thinking about this person in a moment when you're not physically with them. You're somewhere doing something in your busy life and
Mhm.
something reminds you of them, whether you're in a store or you just think of them, you're like, oh, I'd really like to get this thing because this represents that person to me. And I really start to understand the experience of love within the giver, right? Of that.
Yes.
And now I appreciate receiving gifts so much more.
Yes.
So yeah, we can
Yes.
all be evolving in how we understand love in each of those different forms too.
Yes. Yes. Oh, such good stuff.
Thank you so much for bringing these stories to the campfire and surfacing these themes. It's really a joy to talk to you, and just to sit in your presence. I know we haven't physically met, but it feels like we know each other, I think, just from these chats. um, Before we end our episode today, though, I've asked all of my guests this season to really reflect on this overarching theme for the season, which is
Mhm.
stories that reach. Each guest that's coming on my podcast this season has some experience with taking that brave step to share their stories with an audience beyond just our immediate circles, which is still a noble act. I think story sharing and communication and sharing, our internal thoughts and feelings with one another is a noble act. But there is something to it when we take that extra step of bravery and share our stories to maybe strangers or a wider audience. And you have some experience with this. And I'd like you to reflect a little bit for us now what that means to you to share stories that reach.
Well, I think stories matter. Our words matter. Storytelling is as old as time.
Mm,
That is how people connected.
right.
Um, that's how history was passed.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, and I think we're all on these journeys. Whether you're a spiritual person or not, but you are on a journey in your
Yeah.
life. And I deeply, deeply believe we are not meant to go through these journeys alone.
Yeah.
And, the stories give us comfort, they give us hope, inspiration, they help us relate to one another. They unlock parts of our brain where we can problem solve by listening to how someone else got through it.
Hmm.
Um, I, I, I think that we don't talk about how profound storytelling is enough, you
Yes.
know. So I love what you're doing. I love
True.
that you're being brave and that you're connecting people from all over the world to share our stories.
Mm,
As you know, I did write a book, and it was years in the making to get this book out into the world.
mm.
And when the book released, I did not there was a party, but I hid in the upstairs loft of my party and cried
Oh,
and was shaking. I felt so
yeah.
vulnerable that my story was out there. How were people going to receive it? What was my mother going to think? You
Mhm,
know, it felt like I was walking down the street naked because you're really just putting it all out there
mhm,
for the world. And yes, there was editing, and yes, I was careful about what I shared, and I protected,
mhm,
other people's stories that maybe weren't willing participants to be, to share every detail. Um, but I knew that if my story could help one person feel
mhm.
less alone, um, then it needed to be out there. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that stories empower us, they empower others, and we're just walking alongside each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I love this project you're doing. I think it's going to be just so impactful and so profound in the lives of so many people. And I am very thankful that you thought of me to be part of it.
It means so much to hear that encouragement. I want to touch a little bit more on your book before I let you
Mhm.
go, and I'm going to drop the link below because everyone needs to get this book. I was engaged, enthralled from the very first page, and actually I see space in my courses that I teach for this to be like a case study or a master class. Maybe I have to get you on and have you teach a master class on this because so many of the principles that are really foundational to my framework you embody so elegantly in this story, in this book that you've written. You touched on the intricacies of sharing our lives that intersect with so many other people. And there's a lot of complex feelings.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers of permission. How do we get permission from others? But how do we also give permission to ourselves, and where spaces that we maybe just don't need permission because we just need to create freedom and safety for ourselves? But I just felt
Mhm.
like when I read this book, I just appreciated it was in no way overindulgent, right? Like it
Mhm.
wasn't
Mhm.
immediately. I could tell this was not a bid for attention. This was absolutely written in a spirit of service, and as such, I could read every experience that you so carefully prepared for us to hear and receive the wisdom in it. Right? I could learn the lessons along with you, and that is the beauty of storytelling. It's not just overexposing. It's not just like word vomit, and you touched on storytelling is as old as time. And it's a craft that was passed down to us from our ancestors that we've largely lost, right?
Mhm.
Or we've lost, we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about it enough in the sense that there's actual learning and there's actual techniques, and there's a process of dignity that goes along with this. There's a process of mastery that goes along with this, so that our
Mhm.
storytelling can be of service. And this book, Take the Lead by AliceAnne, my cousin, absolutely embodies all of that. It is a shining example. I'd love to teach from this book. I'd love to have you come
Sure.
and teach a masterclass, because it's just beautiful how you did it. The words are beautiful, the stories are beautiful, and most importantly, the lessons are so impactful. So thank you for sharing your story. It is
Thank
very
you.
vulnerable, but
Thank
it's
you.
absolutely worth it.
Thank you. You're making me like tear up because that is like exactly where it came from in my heart is
Mm-hmm.
how can this book be of service to others?
Mm-hmm.
And, it makes the lessons that I learned not in vain. That,
Absolutely.
mhm. So,
Yes.
yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Alison. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know it's late for you on
Yeah.
the East Coast. We're navigating the time difference, but that's the beauty of both storytelling and technology, is we can kind of connect wherever we are in the world. I'm halfway
Yes.
across the world from you here in Taiwan. But I'm just so, so grateful to have spent the evening with you, your evening, my morning with you. And I know my audience is going to get so much from your insights and your stories. So thank you so much for being here. To my audience, thank you for listening with an open heart and an open mind. And I can't wait to have you here at the campfire again next episode. Thank you so much. AliceAnne's stories were so powerful, relatable, and instructive. I hope you all go and pick up a copy of her book, Take the Lead: How Every Woman Can Take the Lead in Her Life, Her Community, and Her World. The link is below. I promise you won't want to put it down, and you'll take away so many memorable gems. Thanks again for being with us here today, and I can't wait to have you back again at the campfire for more stories, insights, and shared exploration of what it means to be a human.